What is going on, guys, and welcome back to another YouTube video. This one I wanted to do something a little bit different because I was kind of scrolling back through my YouTube videos as I usually do, looking at all of them, hoping that some sort of idea for a video will just kind of pop into my head. And while I was scrolling back through it, I just realized, holy crap, like my entire life has pretty much been documented on YouTube for the past 5 years. And yet I have not once made a video kind of going through and explaining my story, my experience with fitness, and how I came to be a fitness influencer, a sponsored athlete, and a coach. And so I thought that I would just kind of go back through and basically explain to you guys my journey with fitness and social media and all of that type of stuff, and rehash a bunch of things that you guys may not have known. Now, if you've been watching for a very, very long time, that means that you've probably watched through everything that I am going to talk about. Like, if you go back in time, you can probably find videos that are going to correlate to pretty much everything that I talk about from the age like 17 to 18 on. You know, I'm gonna go a little bit further back than that to just kind of give you guys a little bit of context with the whole fitness scenario. But yeah, I just thought this would be a great idea for a video, and I know that I spend a lot of time rehashing my experiences with people when they ask me questions on my DMs on Instagram, and I think that this will probably be really useful, and I think a lot of people will sort of be able to look at this and say, like, you know, maybe I'm not alone. You know, there's somebody who's making the same mistakes that I am making as well. So to just kind of bring context to everything, back when I was like 14 or 15 years old, one of the first things that I can possibly remember is just being extremely dissatisfied with the way that I looked. So I was constantly I was born a chubby kid. Like, I was always on the pudgy side of things, and I absolutely hated it. I would just eat way more than I should have, and I wasn't ridiculously active when I was younger. And so obviously I began to accumulate quite a bit more body fat than my siblings, and then my friends as well. And I hated that. Like, I always had these rolls on my stomach that like would never go away, and I just absolutely hated them. I would complain to my mom about them, and she would pretty much say, oh, that's all baby fat, like, don't worry, like, there's nothing that you can do in order to get rid of that. You're just gonna grow up one day and it's all just gonna like disappear. And I remember really not liking that my mom had told me that, because I was thinking, well, this fat is here. People have lost fat. There are humans on this earth that have done like fat loss, weight loss journeys. What separates them from me? Is it just the fact that they're older than me, that they obviously can, their bodies function in a way that my body doesn't function? That doesn't make any sense. I'm just a kid. Like, I should be able to lose this fat if I want to. And I very distinctly remember, like, it's funny how these different scenarios tend to imprint on us when we're kids. But I remember this girl in school basically asking me to like lift up my shirt to see if I had abs. And I was like, I don't really want to. And she's like, do it. And so I lifted up my shirt, and I didn't have abs. I had what I called a barrel, where I would just press a ton of air into my diaphragm and make this really like weird looking stomach thing. I didn't have abs, and I was ashamed about it. And I still remember that like that conversation to this day. And so I thought I need to do something about this. Like, just because I'm a kid doesn't mean, you know, that I shouldn't be able to lose fat. I shouldn't be able to lose weight. So pretty much what I started doing and what I implemented right off the bat was a ton of cardio. I remember waking up before school. So I was in middle school at the time, like about to go into high school, and I would do 30 minutes of intense cardio at 5:30 in the morning, right before I had like a Bible time. I had a bunch of stuff that I had to do, and then it was off to go to school. So I would do 30 minutes of super intense cardio. After school, I did karate. So that was a ton of calisthenics. That was a ton of cardio. It was sparring, all that type of stuff. And then I also did basketball practice during that time. And so needless to say, I went from being a fairly inactive kid that was eating a ton of food to just absolutely like being a fiend when it came to activity. I was constantly moving throughout the day, burning thousands and thousands of calories. And part of my, in my nutritional expertise, I decided to only eat protein during this time. And well, it worked somewhat. I lost a ton of weight. I ended up getting rid of the belly rolls that I had hated so much, the belly rolls that I had fantasized about just cutting off. Like I just wanted to take like a pair of scissors and just be able to just snip them right off. And I finally was able to get rid of those and feel satisfied with my physique. Like for the first time in my life, I was like, I have been able to change myself through these variables, through this, this tangible hard work, and what I've done as far as my nutrition. And it felt really, really good. It felt amazing. In fact, I was super, super proud of my abs. I would start, pulling up my shirt to show my abs to pretty much everybody. If abs were mentioned, I was definitely going to take my shirt off or pull up my shirt to show them off because I was so proud of them. I'd never had them pretty much in my entire life. And so that did get me somewhere. I was doing just calisthenics at the time with karate. So I was doing push-ups, I was doing pull-ups, all these types of things. And I wasn't building a ton of muscle. I was very, very skinny. I had gone from like the pudgy kid to a super, super skinny kid with like barely any muscle, but happened to have, abs because I was lean. And then one day I was actually at a restaurant and I remember this very, very vividly as well. And the guy that was serving me, the waiter, he put the plate right in front of me and I noticed this dude just had massive forearm veins. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to have forearm veins like that. And that was my next quest that I was like set out to do. I'm like, okay, I got the abs. Now I want these massive forearm veins. How do I get those? So pretty much, as funny as it sounds, the first actual weightlifting that I started incorporating was forearm training. Like I would do dead hangs, I would do like wrist curls and these movements that ultimately just like burned my forearms like crazy and give me a little bit of pump, would help the veins stick out a little bit. And that ultimately is what kind of led me getting into weightlifting for the first time. So when I was like 15 years old, I started getting in there pretty consistently. I was probably going 3 times a week to the gym. I really didn't know what I was doing. I remember taking the 10-pound dumbbells and doing 200 curls like in a row. I literally would do 200 curls with the 10-pound dumbbells and people would be looking at me like, what is this kid doing? But I would get a crazy burn in my arms. And I'm like, well, if my arms are burning, I'm obviously doing something. Like I'm gonna have to see results eventually. I would do like 100 pec flies with the cables. And so I didn't see a whole lot of progress while I was training around that time period, probably just because of the pure stupidity of my training routine. But around this time, I actually started to develop really, really bad acne. And if you've been following my YouTube channel, you know that this is something that I have struggled with for years. For pretty much half of my life, I have struggled with incredibly bad acne. And this is where it really, really started to set in. And it really started to become a massive insecurity of mine. I would genuinely be like, I wouldn't want to go out. I wouldn't want to go to certain activities on days where I had really, really bad flare-ups or really bad breakouts. And I felt like the gym kind of distracted me from all of that. And it was a place where I could go, I could feel comfortable, I could listen to music, I could kind of do my own thing, kind of escape that. And it also started to become more of an outlet to escape from like school, and take that like that raw teenage angst that I had from sitting at a school desk 8 hours a day and go like put it to use, kind of point my aggression somewhere. And so acne was pretty bad about that time. I was pretty insecure, but I started finding a lot of peace and comfort in the gym. And around 16 years old is when I started taking things really seriously, and I decided that I wanted to go on my first bulk, because up until this point, I hadn't seen a ton of progress, like I said, because my workout routines were just pure stupidity. And I decided if I need to get big, if that's what I want, then I'm going to need to eat big. Probably one of the biggest mistakes. As I say that, I know that there are a bunch of people behind, like, watching this YouTube video that are like, yep, I remember that. I remember saying that at one point in my life, and it never works out for anybody. Eat big to get big. Because at this point, you know, I was like scared of getting fat. Like, I did not want to get fat. So it took years of doing calisthenics and going into the gym and still like staying trim, staying lean. It took years to the point where I got like dissatisfied with my physique again. And I was like, I want to change even more. Now I want the muscle. Now I want the forearm veins. Now I want the shoulders. Like, my goals changed. And along with that came more dissatisfaction. And ultimately I decided, you know, if I want to get big, I'm going to need to eat big. So I need to start eating again. I need to start shoving food into my face hole, and training as hard as I possibly can. And I definitely started to get results. I started to see like the newbie gains coming in. I started to get a ton stronger, and I was eating in a ridiculous surplus. And you can probably guess where that ended up leading. It got to the point where I was extremely uncomfortable in my own skin. I think I hit around 210 pounds at 16 years old at like 5'9". So keep in mind, that's like 5 or 10 pounds less than what I weigh right now as a 6'1" adult that's been training for like 7 to 8 years. And I was hitting this in like my first actual year of lifting at 16 years old, while also being 4 inches shorter. So I was pudgy as hell. Like, I was fat. I remember going to church one day and like I put my arms at my side and I'm like, man, why am I so like uncomfortable today? I'm like, my armpits hurt. And then I got home from church and I was thinking about it and they were still like irritating me. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I'm so fat that it hurts to put my arms at my side. I was absolutely mind blown. I'm like, I have taken this bulk too far. I should also mention that my mother multiple times had told me, Brandon, I'm not sure if this bulk is a good idea. I think you're taking things too far. Aren't you worried that you're gonna get fat? And I was like, no, Mom, you need to eat big to get big. All I'm putting on is muscle. This is all gonna be straight muscle. I was 210 pounds and I was obese. It was definitely not a good situation to be in. So I kind of freaked out. Once I had that realization, it like flipped a switch and I went back into like crazy cutting mode. I re-implemented all of my cardio, my crazy cardio routines. I re-implemented pretty much only eating protein, and I lost 50 pounds. So I went from like 210 pounds down to like $155, $160, like right around there. And so the fat loss worked. And I knew that, you know, I could kind of turn it on. And I was learning a lot about nutrition in the process. Like, I was learning I'm cutting way too fast because I feel like absolute garbage. And I'm also losing a lot of the muscle during the process. I'm doing way too much cardio, like way too much cardio. I don't even have the energy to do my weight training sessions because I'm eating so little and doing so much cardio. I was just learning so much throughout this process of absolutely screwing everything up. And so when I was 17 years old, you know, after I had lost the fat, I was like, okay, let's try this again, but let's try to stay lean. Like, let's keep it moderate. Let's make sure that we're, you know, trending upwards slowly. And it was much, much better this time around, thankfully. But I was definitely at the time spending way too much time in the gym. And I think that can pretty much be said about, you know, my first year of lifting, my second year of lifting, my third year of lifting, my fourth year of lifting, possibly even my fifth, and then partially into like my 6th year of lifting. I was lifting way too much. Like, I was in the gym for 2, sometimes like all the way to 3 hours, doing tons of volume while simultaneously training extremely hard. And your body eventually kind of adapts to training extremely hard like that, even if it's super, super high volume. But I also started to run into a lot of injuries. Like I had terrible, terrible wrist pain. I had terrible, terrible elbow pain, things that at the time I thought were just a result of weightlifting. I didn't realize that they were coming from the fact that I was just overtraining. Like I was doing so much junk volume that I could have just completely cut out and probably even seen more progress. But yeah, so when I was 17 years old, you know, I spent way too much time in the gym, overtraining. And then when I turned 18 years old, I decided to start my YouTube channel. That was the big one for me. And that was also a period of time where I had to overcome a ton of insecurity. You know, I had a lot of acne around that time as well. So I was very nervous about getting judged for that on camera. I remember setting up my camera in my room. It was actually a camcorder that I had bought. I bought a camcorder and I had it set up in my room facing me, and I was supposed to film my first YouTube video. And I just remember staring at the camera for 3 straight hours. Like I couldn't say anything to the camera because I thought it was so weird to sit all alone and just talk to a camera. You know, now I'm doing it. It feels totally natural. You know, I've been doing it for years now. Like it doesn't bother me at all anymore. But I sat there for like 3 straight hours, didn't film a single thing, hopped in bed, cried myself to sleep because I thought I was such a failure. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I can't even listen to my own voice. I can't even talk to a camera by myself. I'm such a loser. So I started up my YouTube channel and I just said, screw it. I'm like, you know what? I do a lot of cringy things already. I'm like, let's just add it to the list. Let's just start posting cringy YouTube videos. And I just kind of accepted the fact that it was going to be cringy, that it was going to be, you know, rough. And it was embarrassing to tell people that I was like filming a YouTube video somewhere, or people would ask me like what I'm doing. I'd say like, I'm editing a YouTube video or making a YouTube video, all this type of stuff. And then they would check out my YouTube channel and I would have like 100, 200 subscribers or somewhere around there. And every subscriber at that point mattered because I was like, I need to get to like 1,000. Because if you have 1,000 subscribers, at least people will like take you a little bit more seriously. But with 100 to 200 subscribers, like pretty much everybody's a hater at that point. Everybody's like, this guy is a loser. You know, once you hit 1,000 subscribers, then people are like, all right, like that's pretty cool. And then when you hit 10,000, they're like, damn. They're like, this guy's onto something. If you hit 50,000, people are like, all right, this is pretty much a job at this point. 100,000, they're like, you're pretty much a YouTuber. You know, it's not cringe anymore because you have a huge audience. And that was what I was going for. And it took a really, really long time to get over that. But at this point, I was really, really good at cutting and bulking and timing out those things. But at this point, my acne was also at like an all-time high, like absolutely terrible. I was on a couple different drugs at the time, just like antibiotics, that I was trying to help mitigate the acne. But it was just absolutely atrocious. I also around this time had terrible gyno just from going through puberty because I was a pretty late bloomer. And I had really, really bad gyno. And that was also one thing that I was very, very insecure about. You know, I get messages from tons of guys that talk about how like devastating and how insecure their gyno makes them. And I really, really relate to that because I had it really, really bad during high school. Thankfully, it went away as soon as my hormones seemed to level out. And I don't struggle with that anymore, thankfully. But I do know that that is something out there that obviously affects like a lot of guys. Now, when I was 19 years old, I went to my first Olympia. So if you've followed me, you might have seen the picture of me with Chris Bumstead, me with David Lade, and a bunch of other influencers. That was 2019 when I went to my first Olympia. I was 19 years old. And that is ultimately, I went and I filmed the whole thing on YouTube. You can go watch my YouTube video where I'm with Chris Bumstead, I'm with David Lade, I'm with all these guys that I looked up to so much because I was producing videos at the time and these guys were like the peak. These were the people that I had looked up to for so long, and I was finally able to meet them in person. And that's when I realized, like, I knew I wanted to be in the fitness space. Like, I wanted to be in the fitness space so bad. And right around this time, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this fitness thing work. But I was also still overtraining, still running into a ton of injuries. My wrist, my elbow, my nerve in my elbow was absolutely terrible. I went to physical therapy for the longest time for it. And also, I herniated a disc in my back, ego lift squatting 315 pounds on squat. Yeah. Not my proudest moment. So I was 19 years old. I was walking around like a 90-year-old. I could barely pick up my backpack. I was actually in college, you know, it was my freshman year. I could barely pick up my backpack to go to classes. I would have to stand in classes because I couldn't sit because my nerve pain was so bad from this herniated disc. It would just radiate down my leg into my glute and my hamstring, and it was absolutely brutal. I cannot tell you guys how careful I am with training now just because of all of my experiences with injuries. Like, I realize now that training for injury mitigation is one of the most important things you can do, and making sure that you're not pushing yourself too far and that you're not ego lifting. Like, I learned all of these things the hard way. I've never been in more pain in my life than when I herniated that disc. I went to physical therapy. I found out that like the main fix for my herniated disc was going to be loosening up my hips and getting on a really good mobility routine. And so I crafted those. I started taking a lot more care of my like fatigue management and my body in general. I stopped exercising quite as much. My volume came down, and that's one of those points where I realized like, wow, I've just been doing way too much, you know, and I decreased my volume, my elbow pain went away, my wrist pain went away, all these types of things. And I just started training less, and I felt so much better. But at the time, so I was at MSU at it was my freshman year. I was telling everybody that I wanted to go into business or like business management, but at the time I hadn't even declared a major, so I was doing all these stupid core classes. I mean, there were a couple good ones. There were a couple classes, you know, that I thought were pretty good, but most of them were just utter like trash, had nothing to do with my major or anything along those lines. And I specifically remember actually giving a presentation in front of the entire class. And basically what we were supposed to do, it was a really, really basic presentation where you were supposed to talk about something that interested you. And I obviously needed to make it about YouTube videos and fitness because that was my passion at the time. That was pretty much what the only interesting thing that I had going for me was my working out, like bodybuilding, and my YouTube videos. And I also was like, you know what, this is a good way to pick up some subscribers right here. Like all of these students in this class are possible subscribers. I was probably around like, I was probably still in the hundreds of subscribers like around that time, honestly. And I was doing this pitch, or I was doing this presentation in front of the entire class. And I remember my teacher took me aside after I had done that presentation, and she was like, Brandon, she's like, you seem like you are very, very passionate about like this fitness stuff, and it's very, very interesting to me. It was interesting to everybody in the class because nobody else did anything like that. And in fact, there were a bunch of kids that came up to me after and were like, dude, this is super cool. Like, I really respect you for doing this, and I really respect you for making videos and stuff like this because it's hard to do, you know, it takes confidence. And I was like, wow, like, thank you very much. I actually had a really, really good response, but my teacher ended up giving me the feedback. She was like, why are you like in college right now? Like, if this is something that like you really want to do, like you're going to college for like business, like what exactly are you doing? And she got me thinking. And I actually ended up dropping out of college the next semester. And it wasn't just because of that conversation. That conversation definitely played into it because I was like, you know what, like if I want to do fitness, full time, like I need to give it my all. Like I need to put absolutely everything into it. And right now I am definitely not doing that. And so what ended up happening is I finished the semester and then COVID hit. So I decided, like, you know what? Like COVID is going to make it so we're not even going into classes. All the classes are gonna get moved online. I don't even want to go to school right now. So I'm like, you know what? I'll just take a gap year. That was my excuse. It was, I'll just take a gap year. I'll get my personal training certification, and basically kind of see where we're gonna go from here. So that was right around like 20 years old, is when, like 19 to 20 years old, like that's when COVID hit. Ultimately, I started pursuing my personal training certification, and I actually got that. And it was actually a really good experience. I felt like I finally had some qualifications, and it gave me that gave me a little boost. You know, I'm like, all right, maybe this is a step towards ultimately, you know, getting where I want to go. And during COVID, since I was extremely bored, you know, I was working a job at the time that was in the transportation industry, so I was still able to go to work, but at the same time, like there wasn't a lot going on during COVID. And that's when TikTok really started blowing up. And I downloaded TikTok because I was like, you know what? These trends tend to catch on, and maybe this is something, you know, right now everybody looks at it as like this stupid app, but maybe in the future it'll be taken a little bit more seriously. So I decided to download TikTok, and I started posting fitness content on there. And I remember this very, very clearly because there was nobody else posting fitness content on TikTok when I started posting fitness content on TikTok. Like I found a couple other guys after I had started posting, but there was pretty much, it was a ghost town. Like Fit Talk did not exist at all. There was nobody talking about training. There's nobody talking about bodybuilding, fitness, nutrition, anything like that. It was pretty much dances, it was music, and that was it. Like that was TikTok at the time. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm like, I should start posting on TikTok and be like one of the first, you know, people that's ever posted on TikTok. Like who knows? This app could be dead next month, but maybe it'll turn into something, maybe it'll go big. And ultimately, that is where I started to get a ton of traction. I ended up working my way up to like 200 or 300,000 followers on TikTok, making fitness related videos, funny like comedy videos, workout tutorials, all these types of things. And during the time, you know, I was cutting, I was bulking, I was doing all these types of things that, you know, I would be able to, you know, make content from. But I actually started to really get some traction, and I started getting a lot of followers. I would direct those followers towards my YouTube. I would direct those followers towards my Instagram. And I just ended up getting, you know, quite a few more people involved in like what I was doing. And I had quite a few more eyes watching my content. And finally, like at that point, I could see like there's a career like in this whole fitness thing, because I still like I'd gotten my personal training certification, but I still didn't know like what a career in fitness would look like. But I finally started to see it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, if I can build this up, if I can continue making funny TikToks, entertaining TikToks, if I can get my name out there a little bit more, like this is something, you know, that could start making me money in the future. And 20 years old is when I decided to take a massive leap of faith. So I had reached around like 300,000 followers on TikTok. You know, my YouTube had quite a few more subscribers at the time. And my Instagram was growing in followers pretty rapidly. And there was a company called Rise Supplements, which is the company that I still work with. I've worked with them for about 3+ years now. But they basically had this opportunity where they reached out to me, and you can go back to my YouTube and watch all the YouTube videos on this, but the opportunity was called the Rise House. And the whole idea was they wanted to put a bunch of TikTokers, social media, younger guys together that are into fitness and turn it into a content house to promote the brand, you know, promote Rise Supplements. And Alex Eubank was one of these guys that ended up, you know, in the house with us. And he was like the big mover and shaker at the time because his content was popping off more than anybody else's. He had tons tons and tons of followers, thousands and thousands of subscribers. He was just like, you could tell that he was really going to be like the next David Lade. You could just tell he was going to be a really, really big person in the industry. So I had this massive leap of faith. You know, at the time I wasn't super trusting, but at the same time I was like, I'm not going back to college. I'm trying to make this whole fitness thing work. I have this offer to move to Texas and, ultimately, let's see how this goes. And I decided to make that leap. And during the time, it felt amazing. Like, I was like, I'm finally getting to go out there and live my dreams. And everybody at the time was like, what? You're going to Texas to live in a content house with a bunch of guys? Like this is weird. Like this is so strange. Like you're like a mini TikTok celebrity somehow. And I was really proud of it, and I was really, really excited. But that ultimately ended up turning into one of the biggest failures of my entire life. And like I said, you can go back, you can watch through the video. There's videos of me crying on YouTube back during this period. When everything just ended up falling through with this house, I pretty much chalk it down to me not understanding how the fitness industry worked and how business worked at the time. But it simply was not a financially sustainable option for the company Rise. And so the whole thing ended up falling through for quite a few different reasons. That ultimately ended up with me having to move all the way back to my hometown, Bozeman. So I was originally from Montana, moved my entire life down to Texas for this opportunity, kind of going out on a limb. Everybody was telling me I was crazy. And now I had to go all the way back, move back in with my parents, and figure out what to do next. And that was an incredibly, incredibly hard part of my life. It was just simply the worst time. It was extremely humiliating. I hated having to tell people why I was moving back to my parents' house. I hated feeling like a failure, and I felt like I had gone out on a limb and tried to pursue fitness. You know, I felt like I had gone all in, and I just felt like I just got spat back out. And so at this time, I was working a job that I returned to. It's a job that I had quit. I had said, peace out, guys. I'm going to go try to do this fitness thing. And then I came back to this job, disgraced and humiliated, and just I was asking for my job back. I was like, guys, can I have my job back? And they were like, yeah, it's okay. Everybody fails. And I'm like, yeah, I failed pretty hard. I'm back. I'm living with my parents again. And so that was just a very, very brutal time for me. Like I said, I really, really struggled with blaming God for a lot of what had gone on. I felt like I had sort of trusted in him. I felt like I had gotten really, really close to God in Dallas, in Texas, because of the fact that I had never lived, apart from my family before. I felt like I was really, giving it my all, and it took a lot of trust in him, and then to watch the whole thing kind of fall apart was just really, really devastating for my relationship with God. I felt like I was mad at myself, I was mad at him, and ultimately I was just in the worst state of mind that I've ever been in my entire life. And you can go back and you can watch the videos of me down bad, going through this time period, and you can just hear the failure in my voice. You can just hear how bummed out I was about everything that had transpired. And at that point, like, I did have a lot of, I had so much self-hatred to the point where I thought about like unaliving myself. It was a very, very difficult time where pretty much the only thing that I enjoyed was the gym. And you can kind of trace that throughout my entire story, of the gym being like, during my most stressful times, the gym was like the only thing that I had going for me, was the fact that I knew I was making progress, the fact that I could show up to the gym every day and feel better. Yeah, it was an incredibly, incredibly hard time, and I didn't really know where to go from there. The only thing that I knew was that I couldn't stay. If I stayed, it meant I died. That was pretty much where I was at. So I'm like, I need something, anything, to get me out of the headspace that I am in right now. I need something to distract from this overwhelming amount of failure that I am drowning in. And I decided to compete in my first bodybuilding show. Now, I never thought that I would compete in a bodybuilding show. Like, people had asked me before this, are you ever going to compete in a bodybuilding show? And I had always said, no, there's no way. Like, I wouldn't do that. I'm not going to go up. I'm not going to stand up there. I like watching bodybuilding. I love the sport. I'm not going to do it myself. I don't want to stand up on a stage and get judged by a bunch of people while I'm wearing underwear and I'm all oiled up. I'm like, that's just not for me. But I was like, you know what? There's this competition, and it's 7 weeks out, and I had just moved back. I had been home a couple weeks, and there was a competition, the only bodybuilding competition in Montana. And I had known about this for a really long time, because I'd been living in Montana for a really long time. And I pretty much realized, wow, this could be the thing that ultimately like pulls me out of this terrible state of mind. So I had 7 weeks to prep for this bodybuilding show, and I was nowhere near ready. So I had to do my good old-fashioned crash diet. Even though, I knew how to properly diet at the time, I knew that I would have to cut the calories very, very dramatically over the next couple weeks in order to do my best to get in shape. And I did my best. I entered novice classes, and I actually ended up winning first place in my novice classic physique and my novice men's physique. And I couldn't believe it. I beat some guys that looked awesome. I remember there was like this one guy that was like 6'3" or 6'4" I was competing against that was like 240 pounds. Like, he was huge. And I ended up beating some of these guys. It was a small show. Like, it's not that big of a deal, but for me, it's exactly what I needed. I literally felt the competition was like this arm that came down, freaking grabbed me while I was drowning and pulled me straight out of it. It showed me like, hey, like, you can still be successful. You can still win after months and months and months of just taking L after L after L. It was the best feeling of all time. I loved the competitive element of it. I loved stepping on stage. I loved showcasing my hard work. I loved posing. I loved everything about it, even though it was like the most miserable 7 weeks of my life. Because not only did I have like crippling depression at the time, but at the same time, I was also starving myself. I was incredibly cranky. I was such a terrible person to be around during that time. I apologize to my entire family. So now I had something to live for. I could put all of the knowledge that I had gained over the past couple years, when it came to bulking, when it came to cutting, when it came to training, and I could point that towards something which would ultimately be my next competition. In the next year, so ultimately, like, I wanted to compete in the same show, but not do novice divisions this time. And remember, it's the only show in Montana. So it was a pretty, it was a pretty big deal for me, and I wanted to win it. Like, I wanted to win the overall. I wanted to qualify for nationals. And keep in mind, this is an NPC, so this is not a drug-tested show. So I was competing against guys that were enhanced, guys that did take PEDs. And so my faith was just so restored after that competition. And I felt rejuvenated. I felt ready to like live life again and to continue to try, like continue to like to get back up out of the muck that I had fallen into after what was my failure when it came to the whole Texas situation, and try again as hard as I possibly could, but on like a slightly different route, you know, take a little bit of a different approach. And it was actually after my first bodybuilding show that I ended up getting my first coaching client. So I was still working, you know, full time during my first bodybuilding show and for a really long time afterwards. It was only like a year ago now that I actually quit my job and was able to start doing coaching full time. But I got my first client after my first bodybuilding show, and that is when I really realized, holy smokes, I don't just like working out for me. I love giving this information to other people. I love helping other people. I love seeing other people grow and other people get the satisfaction out of fitness and out of mastering their nutrition that I got out of it. And ultimately, that's what my entire life is based around now. But it was really during from the first client, from the moment I got my first client, that's when I realized, like, holy smokes, like, I really want to take this personal training thing to another level. I want to become an online coach. I want to impact as many people as I possibly can, and I want them to experience the great things that I have experienced through fitness and through nutrition. I want them to learn more about themselves. I want them to be able to push themselves through fitness, and that is, you know, one of the main things that ultimately, you know, played out into the situation that I am in today. For my second competition, it was a very, very interesting, rough experience. I thought it was going to be a lot better than my first, and it was on track to be a lot better than my first. I was on track to be bigger. I was on track to be leaner. I was on track to be better. I thought that I knew a lot more going into it. And what ended up happening is about 2 to 3 weeks out from my show, I was starting to struggle with sleep quite a bit, as you do when your calories tend to get really low and your hormones are all wonky. And I ended up smoking some weed. And it was definitely not a good call, looking back on it in hindsight, because weed does cause a lot of anxiety and had caused a lot of anxiety for me in the past. But I decided to smoke a little bit to see if it would help me sleep. And that actually ended up catapulting me into about 2 weeks straight of panic attacks, leading into my second bodybuilding show. So I was like in fight or flight mode constantly. If you've ever had a panic attack and you know how terrible it feels, just imagine that happening for 24 hours throughout the entire day. I was also working. I was trying to function like a normal human being, but my anxiety was just awful. And it actually had to do with a lot of other things that, you know, I may get into in a separate YouTube video, but I can make a whole nother YouTube video on that. But needless to say, it was also an incredibly trying time for me. But I just prayed to God. I said, God, just help me compete in this competition. Like, I've worked so hard for this over the past year. Ever since the last competition, I've had my sights set on the next one. I've been growing. I've been doing everything in my power to win this show. And my heart calmed. My brain calmed. My body calmed a couple days before the show. I came out of fight or flight mode. I found calm. And it was a miracle. After weeks of anxiety and sleepless nights, and just feeling absolutely terrible, feeling like I was constantly going to die, I found calm before the bodybuilding show. And it was a fantastic experience after that had happened. After I felt good again, and I ended up winning that show as well. I ended up getting nationally qualified. I won my class and the overall in classic physique, and then I won men's physique, and it felt amazing. I was on cloud nine again. I was reassured that this was something that I really wanted to do. So I hadn't lost yet. You know, I had just been constantly reassured by these bodybuilding shows, you know, that this is something that I want to continue to do, and this is something that I'm good at. And it was fantastic. Fast forward to my third competition, the one that I've competed in most recently. I switched divisions, decided to do a natural show, and well, that's the show that I got beat at for the first time ever. And so I learned to lose, which was something that I had learned failure in the past, but I had never actually lost on the bodybuilding stage, and I very much lost in my last competition. In fact, I got blown out of the water by some incredible athletes, and that felt awful in the moment, but I just prayed to God that he would help me work through it. And especially, you know, on social media at the time, there were a lot of people telling me that they thought that I should have won, and I had all these different voices, you know, telling me that like I got screwed over, and that also played a part in just making it very, very difficult to take that loss. But I did lose. I accepted it. I moved on, and I'm consistently trying to get better. And my goal is to get my natural pro card this year. But yeah, I hope that really gives you guys a good solid idea of just what my whole life has looked like, my whole journey in fitness. Hopefully a lot of it is relatable to you guys. I mean, during my second competition, this was something I forgot to mention, but I was on Accutane the entire time for my face. Like, my face has always been something I've been super insecure about, especially, you know, being on social media and being scrutinized all the time. You know, people, especially since acne is one of the main, you know, side effects for steroid use. I get that all the time. Like, oh, you're supposed to be natural, but you have acne. You're definitely not natural. And that would make me, you know, incredibly insecure. The Accutane made me feel terrible. I have a whole nother video on that you can go watch through, where I do a 40-minute breakdown of my whole experience with Accutane and acne and how terrible that was, and how it actually led into the panic attacks as well during that second competition. But the main thing that I figured out, you know, just through all of this and through the past couple of years, is that I really want to be useful to people. I want to be useful to society. And I think that I offer a lot when it comes to my nutrition knowledge and my experience when it comes to the gym, and having made pretty much every single mistake in the book. And now I continue to further my education through things like J3 University certification, and just doing all of my own research, trying to educate myself as best as possible to become the best personal trainer and the best coach that I possibly can. I love the clients that I work with. I love them with all of my heart. I am incredibly invested in all of their transformations, every single one of them, and they see incredible results from working with me. And it has been the most fulfilling thing ever to like be able to watch these people succeed, like to be able to give somebody knowledge, watch them take that knowledge and succeed and experience the same amazing like feeling that you experienced, is just an incredible thing. And I don't want to stop anytime soon. You know, this is ultimately what I do want to continue to do with my life. So please drop a like on the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it, and if you enjoyed this type of video. You know, maybe it was super boring for some of you, maybe some of you guys liked it, but other than that, this has been a super deep dive into my life, fitness, nutrition, career, all that type of stuff. We're going to continue growing. You can go to brandonclarkfitness.com and check out my coaching and my workout plans. But other than that, I love you guys. Peace out. I hope this video helped.